Hey everybody, Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com, here with Raio from Luminous Productions. They're an offshoot of Square Enix. You might recall Square Enix having worked on a few games like, I don't know, maybe some Final Fantasy titles. And Raio here is from that team. They've formed an offshoot team, then their first debut title is Forspoken. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome.
If you would, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your position.
Sure. I'm Raio Mitsuno. I'm the creative producer of Forspoken. So my role is really about a little bit of everything. I was part of the overall story creation process from start to finish. I was involved in charge of the casting process, as well as kind of the music development, working with the composers. So a little bit of everything in terms of the creative aspects.
Awesome. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the casting.
Sure.
So we have Miss Holland here, and she is from New York, which is where we're actually filming from right now. So tell us a little about why you chose this kind of not your typical heroine kind of character from New York.
Sure. When we designed Frey, when we started creating this character, we started from the inside out. We started thinking about what is her personality? What is she like? How does she talk? Is she a cat person? Is she a dog person? You know, we figured out all those characteristics, and then we went to the casting process. And then we found Ella Balinska, who just ticked all those boxes for us. She's able to convey every single aspect of Frey's dynamic character, you know, whether it's her determination and her sense of humor, and, you know, but also with that soft kind of vulnerable side at times. And, you know, Ella just seemed like the perfect person. And then we went one step further and said, hey, you know what, let's model the character after her as well to make that portrayal of the character as authentic as possible. So that's how kind of we arrived at that. But it was really just about the story and the character that just felt like the right fit, having her origins in New York.
So yeah, her as a character, she's very much a flawed person. She's had a tough life, some incarceration issues, and that kind of leads into how she ends up in this fantastic world. I don't think we've seen much on that first part of that. Can you talk a little bit about how she kind of ended up in the situation?
Yeah, I mean, Frey, when the game starts off, she's 20 years old. And I don't know for everyone, but at least for me, I can relate as a 20-year-old. I didn't know where I wanted to go in life yet. You know, we're still trying to figuring out who I'm going to be, what path I'm going to take. So Frey's kind of in that beginning stages of adulthood. But things happen and she gets transported to Athia. And then now she's in a totally different environment, you know, and she's trying to figure out what this world is about. There's beasts and, you know, crazy magical sorceresses who rule the world. She has a magical bracelet on her arm that talks, and she can use magic. So she's thrown into an environment where she doesn't know left from right. But over the course of her journey, she meets people, she forms these relationships, and a lot of the things that, you know, people go through, she goes through in Athia, and goes through this amazing journey of self-discovery and growth. And the character that she starts off with at the beginning of the game and the character that she ends up being at the end of the game is almost like two different people. It's a story about, you know, growth and maturation and self-discovery.
Yeah, at first she's very much, she has, you know, she's got a magical cuff and she can perform parkour and she's got this magic. But the first thing on her mind is, I want to go home. I don't want any part of this craziness. So she immediately wants to get right back in the portal and head home, but obviously that closes, and now her situation is certainly more dire. One of the first things that you run into is a giant dragon, and you are ill prepared for that. So, you know, she's having to discover not only the world around her and her magical powers, but also, you know, where does she fit in it? She suddenly finds herself surrounded by things she doesn't understand, and she has very little opportunity to even get her feet underneath her before she's captured. So there's all sorts of craziness that goes on in the story. So where does it go from there? So you're captured and you find yourself imprisoned, and you're this reluctant anti-hero. How do you find yourself going from there to kind of where you end up in the end?
Yeah, so like you said, when she first gets to Athia, she doesn't know left from right. And it's a whirlwind of events happen. And we wanted to create that, you know, it's a fantasy game, it's a fantasy story. We wanted to create these surreal events that happen to her once she gets transported to Athia. Things are very different. And like you said, there's immediately an encounter with a dragon, and she goes, oh my God, is that a dragon? So it's very realistic in terms of her, a little more colorful language. But no, it's about that feeling of when you kind of imagine yourself in her shoes, the stuff that she goes through, you would react the same way, and that's kind of the idea behind the events that we wanted to prepare Frey for. But yeah, when she gets there, obviously she wants to go back to the comforts of New York in terms of a world that she knows is comfortable with. But as she gets to Athia and starts meeting people, she starts learning about the world a little bit. And without giving everything away, like there's a reason why, she is somehow immune to this phenomenon called the break, which is this phenomena that has engulfed the world of Athia and has made it uninhabitable. But she is somehow able to use magic and is immune to the break, which people start looking at her as like, can you be our savior? Maybe you are the person that could do something about it.
A lot to put on a 20-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, she's dealing with, I want to get back home, but in order to get back home, I might have to go on this crazy journey. And it's that's that part of that growth and discovery in terms of like, is she going to rise to that challenge and the call of the people? And that's really where the heart of the story is.
Yeah, kind of overwhelming her reluctancy to trust anyone. So getting over that and kind of fixing that.
And she's got a voice with Cuff kind of every step along the way.
Would much rather be called Van Brace.
Van Brace, yes.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. So obviously I see a lot of DNA from Final Fantasy in this. I see a lot of the parkour system. There's definitely some roots in Final Fantasy, and the combat system certainly has that kind of. You've taken kind of the tactical turn-based RPG parts and pulled them apart and made all these component parts work together for Forspoken. So walk me through how that worked. How did you go from kind of the elements of Final Fantasy that are kind of core and translate them to a more action-oriented title?
Sure. So before working on Forspoken, our last game was Final Fantasy 15. About half our staff were people who were part of the development of 15, and then half of our staff are people that had joined since then. So we've got this mix of people who have been working for a long time on Final Fantasy games and kind of a fresh set of creative minds.
Sure.
So we wanted to take aspects that we knew we were good at, using elements like magic and fantasy as themes or something that we're very comfortable with and we know a lot about. So we wanted to kind of emphasize that and maximize that even further. So which is why for Forspoken we said, you know what, everything about the game, whether it's traversal or combat, and in the story, let's make it centered around magic. So we started there, and that means that even in battle, there's no swords, there's no spears, there's no shields. It's all about magic.
No melee combat.
And for us, it was kind of a challenge to take on. Let's make a game focused solely on magic, even in all these, the details of battle, everything was about magic. So that was for us a big challenge, but we stuck to our ground and we're just like, we're going to do it. We're not going to rely on the classic RPG weaponry and equipment and things like that. We're going to take things a little bit differently and challenge ourselves to really make an authentic experience just based on magic. And really, I think it's surprising and enlightening in a way, because when we created Forspoken, it's a brand new IP. Our goal was to create something original and fresh. As the game, gets near completion, we've gotten a lot of feedback saying, hey, we feel a lot of the Final Fantasy 15 DNA. And for us, it's like, it's not something we intentionally put in there, but I think just the fact that it's something that we're used to in terms of dealing with magic and action and fantasy, that it naturally kind of just found its place in Forspoken as well. So for us, when we hear that feedback, it's kind of enlightening. It's like, oh, okay, maybe people feel something there, even though, it's not something that we specifically said, let's make something like Final Fantasy 15. It was more about creating a brand new experience. And if people feel similarities, for us, it's a nice kind of feedback.
It does feel fresh, though. It doesn't feel like you guys copy and pasted or something like that. It's nothing like that.
Thank you very much.
What a great transition. So magic. Magic, as you said, is kind of the core of the gameplay. And there are over 100 spells. I had no idea that you had that many spells. So how are they split up? How do you break apart all that many magic elements?
Sure. There's 100 spells for players to experiment with and kind of find their own play style. And that's kind of what we wanted to encourage, is that this game can be played in so many different ways because of the variety of magic there are. Just to kind of break it down, there's 4 main kind of categories or classes or schools of magic. And then within each one, there's very different specific types of magic. Like there's magic that's just pure offensive based. There are some spells that could help you kind of in battle in terms of like stopping your enemies in place for a little while. There's spells that you could use to kind of set traps. there's a lot of different ways to fight.
You had like a whip that poisoned people.
Yeah, there's a whip. There's also that's also a way you could heal yourself as well. There's ways to cure status ailments. There's a lot of different things at your hands, and you can just. It's up to the player to find the play style that they feel comfortable with. So there's really no right or wrong way to play the game. It's really just about here's 100 spells for you with very different uses and effects. Have fun with it and find a way that you like to enjoy playing.
It looks like you guys balanced it though by kind of gating it. So you've got like the purple magic that you get in the beginning. So you end up with just a handful of spells. And kind of as the game grows, it gives you more and more that you can choose from, but not necessarily that you don't want to overwhelm the player with a ton of choices up front. So it seems like you're kind of growing into it over time.
That's exactly it. And part of it is, natural RPG progression in terms of gaining abilities as you progress on,
and leveling them up as you go.
Right. But part of it also was tying it to the narrative experience of Frey, who is from our world. And when she gets to Athia, she discovers the use of magic. And as she goes through her journey and as the story progresses, as she gets more, invested in the world, as she starts figuring things out, she gets more and more abilities. It's kind of a player and character progression that goes hand in hand. The player gets more used to the mechanics, then they get new abilities. Frey is getting more used to the world and figuring out her use of magic, and she's getting more abilities. So it's kind of this hand-in-hand experience that we really wanted to create that lended itself nicely in that nice kind of way.
Now, you did mention RPG elements. There is a whole crafting system, and there's a whole augmenting system for equipment. So talk to me about kind of the breadth of equipment. What can you get in the game?
Sure. So primary types of equipment, we have the cloaks, you have necklaces, and then we have the nail system. Each of those gives its own kind of parameter boost.
Literally fingernails.
So it's part of the lore in Athia. There's a culture within Athia where people paint patterns on their nails, and it kind of has a cultural meaning, magical kind of meaning. And it's something that just felt like a fresh take on kind of the typical accessories or things that you could equip. And you could use different ones on both arms, so it kind of gives you a variety of gameplay. But really, a lot of those, each of them have their own kind of unique skills. Some might help with, your offensive attacks. Some might help you with kind of curing HP as you kill enemies. So there's a lot of very detailed effects and specific parameters for each equipment. And then there's also a crafting system where you could kind of, make them stronger or add skills to them. So there's a wide range of the RPG elements that you could really find yourself, taking advantage of if you really want to.
Yeah, very much play your own way. I like that. So the last question I had, and I have to ask this, and it's something that we've all been asking. What is with Square's obsession with belts? You guys just love strapping belts to all of your characters. So I've got to ask, what's with the belts, man? What's with the belts?
I can't speak on behalf of the other games, but in terms of Frey's design, it's the thing that's really important about Forspoken is this idea of modern and fantasy. We're taking a character from our world and we're introducing her into this fantasy world. And if you look at her outfit, like aside from the cloak and some of the gear that she gets,
she starts off just in plain street clothes,
exactly,
like flannel and jeans.
And most of that clothes are still there underneath the cloak. So it was, for a character design perspective, we wanted to create a character that could blend into a fantasy world, but never lose sight of her modern day world origin.
She's still herself.
Right. So it was kind of that mix of modern and fantasy that we really went for and found that kind of nice balance.
Very cool. Anything else you want to share before we close out?
There's a lot to say. There's a lot we want to say. But
discover. This is going to be a big game.
It is. I think people will really enjoy the game when it comes out. From a gameplay perspective, it's a game that caters to you. There's 100 spells to use in battle. You can find your own play style, and it's got a very, very heartfelt story to it. Heart is at the core of the story experience. We have a character that we all love on our side, and she's a brand new character. So there's so much for her to experience, and I think people are going to really enjoy what we've prepared and really be able to root for this character. So January 24th, we hope everyone's excited for it as we are, and just not even a month and a little bit to go. Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.